Really funny to me. Okay, we're about to go live. This too. It was just really funny to me to think about Gigi and all of the angelic characters we've had, and how he would hate all of them. Like, he shouldn't. Please check the video resolution. The current resolution is this numbers, which is not optimal.
Well, I mean, there's no. Oh, it's because you zoom in and out, I think.
All of the angelic characters.
Why is this link I sent? Oh, off.
I
mean, there's no. Oh, it's because you zoom in and out, I think. Yeah, it's working.
Okay. Does it look okay?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I need to.
I think the resolution is just weird because of the art program.
Okay. Well, guess what? It's gonna have to deal with it. I mean, obviously, I need to. Because this is the program we got.
It looks just fine.
Okay, good. Excellent. Well, hello all. Okay. Well, to guess what? Technical difficulties stream. And me not knowing what layer Nolan's abs are on. Okay, good. Excellent. Well, hello all. Okay. Well, to guess what? Technical difficulties stream.
I have to turn that off so you don't get the double.
Yeah.
But okay, everything's
voice
working.
loop. Okay, yay. All right. Apologies for all the knuckle popping. It's my bracing myself for the cold reality of art. Where is my optional bitch? She's somewhere on these layers. There she goes. Okay. Because she's not actually going to be here, I don't think. And I think my sister actually said that she was probably going to be, oh Lord, tuning in to this stream with us, so maybe we'll have some extra people to talk to.
Yeah, I'll be monitoring the chat in just a minute. I'm throwing up all the links for everybody on all our social medias and on the Patreon.
Oh, yeah. Actually, let me go ahead and link this over to our DeviantArt as well. Which, yes, we have a DeviantArt. It is, for the most part, just going to be a gallery for a lot of the art that is on our website, like the character art and maybe some other things. But, you know, if you use DeviantArt and you want to follow us there, that's great too. And maybe eventually it'll get some exclusive content. All right. And so right now I basically just have some really rough layouts going on for the upcoming page. And this is basically just a process called thumbnailing, where you lay everything out really roughly and then you go over it like 1,000 more times until it looks good. And that going over it 1,000 more times is pretty much what we're going to be doing today, I think. And so if anyone has any questions, feel free to let me know. I think we're going to start on Lowen because he needs to be elongated. I messed up his proportions a little in the sketch and realized I made his chest too squat. But I can't move him too far down because I gotta also move Cheshire because they are a little low in shadow, which is okay because they're adorable. And who doesn't want an adorable shadow?
Well, considering how much I'd be jumping at shadows, I would want to be someone's shadow.
That is Cheshire's whole life right now, is being scared of everything around them. And we're gonna fix a little bit of this. Sure.
In case I need to chat something out because I can't chat from my phone to this stuff.
There should be another power cord sitting someplace that should reach there. It's the shorter of the two. There it is. It's by my backpack. Okay. Sorry, we're getting the other. Right there by the Age of Sigmar box. Yeah. Getting some stuff set up still. Oh Lord.
Yeah, I didn't think I was gonna need a computer. I was just gonna watch chat on my phone, but I forgot. I don't want to chat as myself.
Right. And it's a little easier from a computer, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
So Lowen, we have our beefy boy, and he has pointy ears. And all these big, strong neck muscles.
Yeah, Lowen's a thick boy.
Yes. I mean, it balances out because Alex is extraordinarily slim, and so is Cheshire, but a lot of our cast is very thick.
Indeed.
And I have no objection to this.
A lot of our cast has pointy ears, too.
The number of elves in this adventuring party is too damn high. But it's not. It's not, actually. It's just, coincidentally, other races have pointy ears, too.
Indeed. It's an interesting thing in fantasy, I think, that, if you have non-standard ears, they tend to be pointy.
Mm-hmm. Or, like, super rounded, like circle ears.
Mm-hmm. Like gnomes.
Like gnomes, yep. But I pride myself on there being a lot of different ear shapes, even among the pointy-eared people, and
Yeah, every ear is still unique.
Yeah.
I just think it's interesting that there are so many pointed ears in fantasy settings.
Yep. Well, I think it's a really easy way for people to take humanoids and set them apart from one another.
Mm-hmm.
Especially people who, and this is going to sound terrible, and I don't mean it that way, but people who are not exceptionally good at character design or who are just starting out, whose characters are going to look predominantly human and who maybe haven't quite figured out like the best way to physically set people apart outside of like height. That ears are a very easy thing to do, because you can have I mean, if you look at like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films, the elven ladies all just look like really beautiful human ladies, but with elf ears. They don't do much in terms of making them look like they are of a different race. Whereas, by contrast, Dragon Age, particularly Dragon Age 2, they look quite a bit different than the humans.
Indeed. You can tell they put a lot of work into designing them as a race instead of just taking individual characters and then making them different.
Yes. And that's one of the things I love about the Dragon Age franchise.
Sir Peter says, "I'm here, can't hear because it's late lunch for me, but I'm here."
Oh,
so thanks for joining us.
Well,
I really appreciate it.
I'm sorry you can't hear.
Yes, I sent him a chat, thank you, because he can't hear.
Yes. But
we appreciate everyone who watches.
Yeah, we do. And it's always nice to have company and see people's input. Wait a minute. Did I give Lowen too many fingers? No.
1, 2, 3.
No, this is part of his hand. Okay. Here we go. Yeah, I just drew them wrong.
Well, they're just sketched out.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's the art process, right?
It is. It is do, and then do again, and then do again. Because even these are not necessarily better, but they'll be better the fourth time around.
I mean, speaking of Dragon Age, they did again, and then they did again. They're all three very different games.
Yes.
They're trying to see what works. And I think they all worked in their own way.
And honestly, they did move back towards a more humanoid look for the elves in Inquisition, because a lot of people were like pissed off that the elves looked buggish, I think was the thing, because they had the big old eyes. I thought Meryl was the most fucking adorable thing in the world, and I had no problem with the elves.
She was adorable.
Yes. I had no problem with the elves in 2. But they kept a little bit of the sharper features, but they moved them more towards humans. But the Kunari, on the other hand, the Kunari's designs stayed and, in fact, got emboldened. And
well, that's been the name of the game from the beginning. They just kept emboldening and self-defining the
because if you
Kunari.
remember I mean, the Kunari are the most stark change, really. If you remember in the first game, Sten, he's like just a big black dude with white dreads. And then, man, in the second game, those Kunari designs hit, and I was like, so hype.
Not ashamed to admit, I didn't realize that Kunari was like
a race.
I was just like, oh,
I thought it was a religion.
Just a religion of people from a different place. They're very different. Yeah.
Yep.
An entirely different race.
And the interesting thing is that when I first played the second game, and I thought that, and I saw the Kunari introduced as a race, and they were so different than how Sten looked, I thought that Sten was a convert to the Kunari, but then I realized upon playing that Stens cannot be outsider races. So he just was a poorly designed character in the beginning.
And they hadn't designed their entire world yet, which is fair.
Because they didn't, I mean, that was the flagship for that franchise, and they didn't think it was going to go anywhere, which is tragic, and has resulted in Dragon Age being used as a lot of experimental ground for BioWare as a team. Like, you'll see a lot of things that got thrown into a Dragon Age, and if they worked, they got to be in the next Mass Effect, and if they didn't, then they got scrapped. And that definitely punishes the series, but it's still my favorite BioWare series.
I mean, but there's something to be said about that, too, is that they're willing to experiment. EA is not often willing to experiment.
Yep.
And, I mean, even, as a DM, I have to do that. I throw things in, I see if they work, and if they don't, we kind of leave them behind, or we forget about them. And if they do, then I remember that. I mean, there are a lot of things that would be spoilery to say about this campaign and how it all worked, but I planned a lot of things out, and then they happened kind of the way I thought they planned. But then there are just things that I tried, and that it's the thing that every DM complains about, this side character that they all latch onto and are like, we love him, we love you, Sir Huggle-Buggle.
Huggy Buggy.
Huggy Buggy. I'm
Yes.
sorry, Huggy Buggy.
It's okay.
And then you're like, but what about this cool, well thought out, interesting villain over there? And they're like, yeah, but
but fuck that guy because he's mean.
But I mean, part of being a DM is figuring out how to engage your players' interests anyway. If it doesn't work the first time, you make it work the second time.
Yeah, and just a word of advice: if it doesn't work the first time, don't repeat it.
Yeah, don't repeat
as a general rule.
Don't repeat it the same way and hope it sticks this time. You have to change something.
Because the truth of the matter is, I tried a few things during my first campaign that I thought were going to work and were going to be really engaging, and some of my players got into them, and the rest of my players were like, but I don't care about this. I care about, this other dude who is so far out of my league and not interested in me at all. And, or I care about befriending this random guard who thinks I'm a piece of shit who's not contributing to society. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm just going to have to roll with that instead.
You have to live with your mistakes, but you don't have to repeat them.
Yes. Like when you sometimes pick a CR 20 monster to face off against a level 1 character because you think that there's no chance the level 1 character is going to see them, and then there are some nat 20s and some nat 1s rolled, and then you have to have that player stare at you like you're an idiot because they're like, he can't just, what does he have, like plus 40 to hide? And anyway.
Sometimes you make mistakes even when you have plus 40 to hide.
Yep.
But you know what? Sometimes there's cosmic justice too. Like I remember one time, this character wouldn't leave me alone. He was just annoying me, and I'm like, sorry, buddy, but you made a choice that made it so that I can't
fix this for you.
Can't fix this for you. And then an orc just crit him for 3 times his hit points, and he exploded. And I was like, well, there's your problem solved, buddy.
Yep.
And I was really young at the time, and I didn't handle it as gracefully as I could have. But
you didn't stuff his character sheet in a confetti cannon and shoot it at him.
Oh, it was kind of close.
Which I've thought about.
But that's one of the marks I think of good DMing in D&D is recognizing that you're the DM, you can make mistakes, but that you should just you can gracefully move past it.
Mm-hmm. The second campaign I ever DM'd, I made a lot of mistakes and was going through some garbage while trying to run it, and I was playing with 2 players, one of which was you and the other was a good friend of Ranger's, who both knew the rule books inside and out. And I just had to accept that when one of them was like, actually, I was about to get schooled, and the narrative was about to change. and that's okay.
And it's important as players to not rules lawyer to the point that you're driving the DM crazy. But if you have an ability that's a thing you can do and it's an important thing, it's okay to be like, it is okay to be like, hey DM, actually, I want to do this because I can. But also you can't overdo it, and you can't be mean about it.
Because you also have to accept the fact that the DM might be like, you know what, you're right, that is an ability you have, and you can use it. But can you use it against this CR16 monster?
And that's something you can, and there are appropriate times to do it, but shouldn't do often.
Yes. Hey, the DM's sick of your shit. Here's Cthulhu in power armor.
I like to say that it's important to remember that everyone's there to have fun.
Yeah.
Not just the players and not just the DM.
That's one of the reasons why I've never understood the kind of player that sits down with the sole intent of trolling their DM and seeing what they can get away with.
Beating the DM.
Beating the DM. I don't get that. I have played with a group of people who the DM was so focused on punishing players, like all names will remain anonymous, but his wife was trying to pick up DMing, and the advice he gave her was figure out a way to punish your players for not doing what you want. And I noped right out of that campaign because I was like, you can't run a campaign like that. I mean, because if you do, then no one's having any fun because you're obsessively trying to control your players.
Absolutely.
And it's just stressing you out that they have free will and they're getting pissed off because you're punishing them for making decisions. And that's what D&D is about, is decisions. And
and it's okay for there to be a power fantasy.
Sure.
That is a component of Dungeons and Dragons. You know, it's a great place to take some power back in your life.
Yes.
And have a power fantasy that you just cannot in any other way. But your power fantasy has to end when it starts to infringe on other people's good time.
Yes.
And you shouldn't want it to.
Yes. That's the thing, is that, you get to play God. That doesn't mean you have to be a cruel God.
Yeah.
Because guess what? If you're a cruel God, you lose all your worshipers. And they go play with a more magnanimous God.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is if you enable your players' power fantasies, then your power fantasy can also have more free reign.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but I mean, that's I always make sure to say that that's not the only part of D&D, though.
Sure.
I mean, then it's not interesting or fun if it has no meaning, and then it's not truly a power fantasy.
Yep.
So I mean, it's there's a lot to balance, but I think it's a lot of fun when it is.
And balancing it is mostly creativity and level-headedness.
Mm-hmm.
That's 90% of what you need.
Not having an emotional reaction.
Yes, because I have also seen that in some young DMs. Like the first person I ever tried to play D&D with, and I wanted that campaign to work out so bad, but it didn't because he kind of wrote himself into a corner and then transported us as players, just plane shifted us to like a Wild West setting in an inescapable way, like forced us into it. But then said Wild West setting wasn't working out like he thought, and he didn't like it, and he got super upset and like mad at us as players for interacting with said Wild West world the way we did. But like, I had gold, and gold is just the currency in a medieval fantasy setting, but in a Wild West setting, you throw around a couple of gold and everyone's like, well, you can have whatever you want, little miss.
A small gold coin was worth $20, and $20 was worth a lot in the Wild West.
And so I was like, well, shit, I'm going to just kid out the whole party with guns while we're here. And yeah, he didn't take kindly to that, but he was like, well, you can't communicate with these people. I'm like, yeah, I can. I have the tongues spell.
Yeah, and
I'm
even if you
a
didn't,
wizard.
Gold speaks.
Gold speaks. I put that on the table. I point at the guns. Like, it really, I think he thought he was going to put us in this strange world where we were going to immediately try to find our way out. And instead I was like, wait a minute. There's running water and we're all rich?
We're going to stay.
Deal. And he's like, what about the cultists? I'm like, you mean the cultists that were summoning Baylors when we were level 1? What am I going to do about them?
I'm going to let them do what they're going to do.
They're going to do what they're going to do. That town's gone. I might come back later when I have a cannon. But he did not like the way that turned out, and he got extremely frustrated, and the campaign died terribly. And
that happens, but there are a few steps you can take to kind of avoid that.
Yeah, like not give your players no choice but to be transported to the Wild West, or take all their stuff when you transport them. Right. Sometimes you get teleported, and the force of the teleport spell scatters all your stuff and sets it on fire.
Indeed. I think most of my campaigns have I've managed to make them wrap up, but a few times it's been, well, no one can do it after this week, so we're gonna wrap it up this week.
Yeah, that was how my first campaign ended. One of our players was going to, I think, like Wisconsin the next week for like 3 weeks, and another one was like always having to leave for work when we were playing, and we just were like so close to the end, and I was like, you know what? We're gonna finish this tonight so that everybody's here. And 6 a.m. rolled around, and the next thing I knew, we were making blood rockets out of siege engines, and I was like, yeah, that seems totally legit. Like, because that's, and I still think that campaign wrapped up pretty satisfactorily for most people involved. Apparently, not every player agreed, but I also extended the courtesy that if you weren't happy with how your character's wrap up went, I would follow up with you, and then said unhappy people didn't all take me up on that, so I was like, well, I guess everyone's fine with this, and that's where we went.
So how do you make a topical element of someone's character's design, like those horns or those, how do you make them look like they're part of the body and not just sitting on top of it? Throw in some art questions here.
Sure. So,
because you do, I feel at least that you do a good job of that. Because sometimes you look at something and it's like, that just looks like it's sitting on the body and not part of the body.
I think, and this is possibly entirely wrong, okay, because you threw me an art question to which I'm not 100% sure I have the right answer. But I think that the most important thing with adding elements to anatomy is understanding the anatomy that is beneath it. So, like in the case of Lowen here, he basically has, bone plating or scale plating like a dragon would have, but it's on a humanoid body. So you have to understand like where his muscles run to. So where is that plating sitting? Where is it defending? And it actually kind of looks similar to how like human abs would if they were taken to like a crazy extreme. And that's what makes it work, I think. Also, there are depth perception tricks like this. Okay, I'm going to delete a little thing here so that we can kind of see. So this spike sits on his shoulder, but not. Your shoulder is a rounded surface, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of just drawing it like this, where it just looks like it's sitting on top, if you do something where you give it like a little bit of a curve, where it's meeting the curvature of his body, that makes it look like it comes to the other side and it meets that curve. And so a lot of it is understanding how shapes interact with each other.
Right, and that even though your art surface is 2D, his body is not.
Is not 2D, right? And that is something that I am working on and working at getting better with, is learning to mix those reptilian features with his more humanoid features, like his claws, the pads of his hands, which you'll actually see in this page when it's done. But if you've ever looked at a reptile's feet, a lot of them they have on top these little striations where the knuckles bend and stuff. Right. But on the bottom, they have tough pads because they are like desert creatures, But a whole human hand and arm isn't going to be covered with those, so you have them thicker in these areas where your hand is more vulnerable, where it's gripping things, and then they just kind of like taper out, and they speckle further across as it meets more with the human aspect. Right. And so it kind of is just, if you understand how both things work, you mash them together until they look aesthetic.
Right, and as always with art, lots of trial and error, I'm sure.
Yes.
But it's so.
Lowen was definitely the most difficult design of the cast. he's not the most difficult to execute because he's actually a fairly simple design once you understand what all is happening.
Right. And you put your time in design to
Yes.
save yourself time
in
execution.
Right, because if I have to spend every panel figuring out, wait, how does this work, then that's a lot of stuff that's a lot of time I'm spending not doing other things. But that's not even really any different than, say, something like pointy ears. You have Lowen's pointy ears, which are pretty close to his body, and then you have, say, Oriella's pointy ears, which are much larger, but you still have to think about, okay, cartilage is what makes our ears do this number, right? So based on the way that cartilage is growing, if you want them to be up, the cartilage isn't going to break until about up here, and then the rest of the ear has to scale to that, And so anytime you are changing anatomy, the number one most important thing to remember about it is the anatomy you're basing it on. Even Cheshire is...
Yeah, her ears are very different.
Very, very different. And so you think about, okay, well, Cheshire's ears, they basically poke straight out. This is still the cartilage line supporting them up like that. But then, the rest of it is soft tissue beneath them, which is why they look so rounded. Because when that cartilage weight breaks, it breaks downward because they don't point up, Sorry, I'm going to erase all that. So, every person is different, and there's a little bit of advantage to that too, because you might see a half dragon who looks incredibly different than Lowen, because Lowen is, I believe, half dragon, half elf.
Yes.
And if you were to, say, find a half dragon, half orc, they probably would take a lot more of those draconic features in the jaw.
And you would have a much thicker barrel chest and torso, too.
Because orcs already have this really squared off, really wide jaw. And so do dragons, but elves have these incredibly slender features. So you end up with him with a jaw that juts a little, but favors, his mother's elven heritage of being high cheekbones and a little more slender. But if he were half orc, half red dragon, he would be just a beast of a dude. And he's already a beast of a dude, So muscular structure is important, and characters like Lowen are trickier because you're looking at a generally cold-blooded creature, a reptile as your reference, and a warm-blooded creature, and our bodies both work extremely differently. Everything from this creature may have an exoskeleton or squirt blood from its eyes as a self-defense mechanism, and this creature's an elf, and you just got to make them work. And so that's why some of it is aesthetic and some of it is science.
Luckily for Lowen, he does not have to lay out in the sun before he can get going.
Yes, because he's an ice dragon.
Dragons are... No dragon has to.
Yeah. And also, even if they did, his half warm-bloodedness spares him that. I don't know what I'm doing with this mouth. It kind of is more like a mustache at this point, but I'm just saying.
Lowen needs a mustache.
Look how great he would look with a mustache.
But curl it on the ends.
Okay, yeah, a curly, a Fable merchant mustache. Those guys were totally pedos, by the way. I don't care what anyone says.
We were staying up till midnight one Christmas because we wanted to go to Christmas midnight mass.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to find things to watch because I didn't stay up a lot as a kid.
Right.
And it was really hard to stay awake. And we found this Christmas program, and it was pretty good. So we kept watching it. And then their bassist came on, and he had the most magnificent mustache I have ever seen. And then suddenly this was the most interesting Christmas program I had ever seen in my life. And that's what it was like. It had the curl mustache, but then it had
I did. Oh,
this
gosh.
delightful part of it was waxed straight. So he had a curl and then like a straight knife point coming out of it.
That's pretty rad.
Incredible.
I passed a dude on the road one day, and I straight up wanted to stop this man and be like, "Sir, your mustache." It was, I mean, huge. Like the cartoon curly mustaches that are like as wide as your head is tall. It was like that, but it was also so bushy. Like I just stared at this guy, and it was like the KFC Colonel style, but like off of his face.
That's fabulous.
And I was like,
I didn't think these were real.
yeah, and this guy clearly can grow a lot of facial hair, right? But he didn't. He just had a goatee besides that. So it didn't take away from the mustache.
Right.
And I was just like,
It's a work of art.
it is. And I couldn't even imagine what he must go through to make his mustache do that. Now, I don't have much of a glorious mustache, but having dealt a little bit in like trimming your facial hair, I just am like, wow, this is really difficult and a nightmare, and
Yeah.
I can't
It's hard to
imagine
eat with.
making this a work of art. But
Some
you-
people do. There's
some-
a competition every year.
there is, and it turns out it's very inclusive. You style a mustache, and they don't even care if it's a wig, because if it's a fabulous mustache,
It's welcome.
it's welcome. And I'm so into that, and I think it's cool, and I'd love to go to one. Give me 1 second, guys.
I saw a cool
I need
beard
to
competition
look at
on that vein.
Lowen's face. Ugh.
And an Asian guy wanted to participate but couldn't grow any facial hair. So
Aw.
he took a picture of himself and he digitally created one for himself, and they were like, absolutely. And it was wonderful. It was a big old dwarf braided beard with like 30 braids in it. It was wonderful. I
That's
wish I
awesome.
could have one.
Yes. If I could grow a beard, like, because of course, once again, I come back to the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies. They make this joke about how people think there aren't any dwarven women, but it's because all dwarves have beards, But if I could grow a magnificent dwarven beard that I had to like tuck into my belt, I would.
Yeah.
I 100% would.
Why wouldn't you? It's wonderful.
Like, ain't nobody got time for, I guess that's a gender role thing,
I guess.
but that's just rad. And I'm like, I don't think it makes it difficult to tell a man from a woman if they have facial hair. And maybe it is because I am not a very picky or discerning judge of, I suppose you would say, traditional beauty, but I saw a lady with a mustache that I was like, 10 out of 10.
Great mustache.
Great mustache. Great everything. And this bothers me not. And I'm like, I wish I could grow a sweet dwarven beard, but I can't.
Well, it's because beards are great and interesting and lovely.
Yep.
That's my biased opinion. I mean, if you've seen my picture that Bard has drawn.
I'm also going to just be honest and say, if I had a beard that was made up of more hair than my hair, dudes online would probably stop harassing me for nudes.
That's true.
Now, they would be fools,
but
they probably would stop harassing me for nudes. And I'd be okay with that.
She's referring to like perfect strangers, by the way.
Oh yes. Yeah. Just so we're incredibly clear, I'm referring to people like who.
Your Words with Friends partner, randomly
Yes. Yes, a randomly assigned daily match on freaking Scrabble, okay? Words with Friends starts messaging me,
Is you girl send nudes?
asking me if I'm married, and I'm like, yeah, I am. Is it a lie? Sure, but whatever. And he's like, oh, that's nice, dear. Are you happily married? And I'm like, wow, you really, okay, yes, I am. I'm happily married to a woman, in fact. And he's just like, that's nice, dear. How old are you? And I'm like, I'm in my mid-20s. He's like, I don't understand. And I'm like, I can't help you. And then he continued to message me and ask about the status of my marriage. And I finally was like, and yes, I am aware, before anyone says it, I should have blocked him. But I was winning. And I didn't want that loss on my win streak because I was crushing this guy. And he eventually conceded because I wouldn't send him nudes, and I would not concede that I was not happily married and wanted to run away to freaking Texas or wherever this random 60-year-old man, who, by the way, does not have a strong mastery of the English language, was.
Apparently, he's not playing the game for the English language.
Right? Or, random people on, like, Heroes of the Storm. I'll get on a random match, and I'm like, okay, I'm really nervous to play online with other human beings, but I'll do it because I like this game. And I get invited to a party, and my username is not very unisex, something I regret, by the way. But I get into a party, and I run around, and I'm a healer and a support, and everyone's all nice, and then they are like, "Wait, you're the owner operator of a vagina? That changes everything. Send nudes." I'm just like, no.
But speaking of dwarves and beards, and a funny story.
Okay.
Excuse me. At the age of 10, I started collecting Warhammer dwarf figures.
Yes.
And I'd read The Hobbit at like 8, and dwarves were my favorite thing. And they kind of still are.
Dwarves don't get enough love.
And
It's just a true story.
So I grew up religious, and beards were kind of like you didn't grow a beard unless you were like an old wise
Isn't that
person.
such a weird thing?
But anyway, you're supposed to be clean shaven and represent your religion and blah blah blah. Well, I came back from a mission for my church and promptly grew as magnificent a beard as I could. And my mom was surprised. She's like, why do you want to grow a beard? And I was like, Mom, have you looked at my hobbies for the past ever, since I was 10? And you've seen all the glorious, magnificent beards that I painstakingly assembled and painted in a large variety of colors, may I add. Yeah, I'm growing a beard. It was pretty amusing.
I too own dwarves in a large variety of colors, but
The beard's not the focal point.
Not even visible, in fact. But yeah, and
because little known fact, dwarves are rad. And
yes.
They're not comedic relief for your Hobbit movie.
Oh, it makes me so mad. I'm sorry, dwarves.
They're not comedic.
They're not.
But
they're such
Gimli was the comedic relief for Lord of the Rings, and all 13 of them were comedic relief with some angst.
Yeah, I was gonna say because Thorin was all angsty, but that's the thing is like I don't get it because they're such an infamously like stoic, dour people. In fact, dwarves in traditional D&D settings they take a -2 to charisma because they just dealing with other people just don't understand dealing with them because they always come off as like rude and gruff and antisocial, and it's because they're mired in tradition. They are mired in their way of thinking, in their things they've been taught by their ancestors, because that's how
the community thrives.
Exactly. That's how they all learn their craft. That's how they all learn war. And it does not make any sense to me why
they're jokesters.
And it's because they're short. They're short and they're considered less attractive than the other fantasy races, which
and the unfortunate and racist parallel is that human dwarfs, are considered comedic.
Yes.
Which is ridiculous.
It is.
Unless they want to be, because I watched a stand-up comedian who was hilarious, but he was hilarious, not his dwarfism.
Exactly. The guy, Peter, I can't remember his last name, but he's the guy who plays Tyrion Lannister.
Peter Dinklage?
Yes, Dinklage. He has played a fair share of both serious and comedic roles, and he is very comfortable with poking fun at his own size, but it's just, I don't know. It's just another form of prejudice that really blows my mind, I think is what it comes down to, is that
they're just funny little people. It's ridiculous.
it's terrible.
'Cause they're
And
people.
yeah, and especially like when you look at fantasy dwarves, like they're very intense people. And
Well, I mean, the flip side of the coin to that, hard to deal with, is if you do learn how to interact with dwarves. If you become a dwarf friend, then you are a friend
You're
to the
in.
entire people, and
You're
you're
in.
forever.
And I have a wizard who knows this very well. She was not taken seriously by the dwarf who ended up being her husband when she met him because she was very tall and very beautiful and dressed rather scantily, and he just thought she was, a dumb human skank. And then she impressed him because she had knowledge engineering and metalworking and knew what he was working on and was asking him all sorts of questions, and he was like, oh, I see. And then they got along quite well, and she then took all the things she learned about his culture from being with him and around him and ended up befriending several more dwarves throughout the campaign because she was like, you guys don't know how to talk to them. I know how to talk to them. Just leave this to me.
Yeah, and that's why I gave her that effective charisma bonus, because she lost the well, essentially it counteracted their penalty to charisma because she understood them.
Yep. And because she could speak Dwarven and Draconic, she could talk to this guy on the other side of a cell wall and build a rapport with him, where other people would have just been like, "Oh, cool. Well,
Stuck in this cell with
stuck in
dwarves.
this cell with this dwarf who doesn't want to talk to me. I guess we'll just do whatever." And I realized I keep zooming in on Lowen's crotch a lot, and I'm gonna try to avoid that going forward.
It just occurred to me that with that dark cell wall in between them, their charisma playing field was leveled, wasn't it?
It sure was, and it's interesting because her charisma was immense. We were pushing epic levels in that campaign, and her charisma was 28, I want to say, something like that. And neither of those charismas mattered because it was pitch dark and they were on the other side of a stone wall, and the only thing that mattered was that she understood his culture and his significance to that culture and what he was going through with having to, put down his own guards who were being driven mad, and was able to build a little bit of that, like, kindred respect with him, and he ended up helping her resist some madness because he was a dwarf and he was just so stubborn that he resisted it. And she was like, well, my intellect isn't saving me, so maybe stubbornness will. And it did. And it did.
I mean, never underestimate the endurance of dwarves.
And even in this most recent campaign that we've been playing, we've befriended a lot of dwarves, and specifically, we were traveling with some refugees, and among them were dwarves, and the dwarves were the only ones who kept making their fortitude saves. It is not a bad crotch. I don't think so anyway. But that's not what this kind of. It's not that kind of stream. Although I am working on something that is more akin to that kind of stream that maybe we'll get to do later.
I mean,
not on YouTube.
You might be getting a flavor of our preferred form of D&D, which is that we like story heavy and interpersonal interaction heavy D&D. But I mean, we have a healthy dose of combat and
Violence.
I think all of it adds together. because the threat of violence is what brought those two that we were talking, into the room together.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that D&D is a great place for us to explore social interactions that we otherwise also couldn't have.
Yes. And if you have a decent grasp of like the psychology of what some of this crap does to you, it opens up a lot of very interesting social interaction doors, because if you just always think of it from the perspective of yourself as the player, you're like, oh man, gross, that dude just died in front of me. But if you stop and think about the perspective of your character who just had some person cleaved in half over their body, like that's going to result in some trauma. And so the next person you talk to who has seen a dozen of those, you're like, "Oh, I mean, you want a drink, man?" Like,
the interesting thing is that it can help give you empathy, or I guess if we want to, I mean, a form of empathy. Empathy technically is not possible if you haven't experienced it, but it helps you have
sympathy,
some experience with it.
Yep.
If you have experienced it in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
So it's technically sympathy, but it's more on the road toward empathy than just simple sympathy.
Yep. And, I think personally that it's interesting and rewarding to kind of delve into the level of trauma that adventurers go through, because they are just people, most of them are just people, and they might be of different races and they might be of different backgrounds, but a lot of them, they see some crazy shit. And I can just tell you that my levels of trauma, nowhere near as bad as my adventurers' levels of trauma, have already done irreparable damage to my mind. And so if you look at the kind of stuff that these people go through, and like my paladin, he is just the goodest of boys and he is a nice guy, but there are some things that really put him on edge now. The guy loves doing hair, but after he was forced to behead his mom, there was a little bit of a choke up of being in that proximity of people's throats again. It was and I feel like that's something that probably doesn't occur to a lot of people, because they're just like, I'm a tough adventurer and I move on. But that, and that might make for a fun game, but it doesn't necessarily make for a really rich and rewarding story, because it takes the humanity out of your people.
And it takes everyone being on board for that.
Yes.
Because I recall, we had a character who discovered he had repressed trauma in his past.
Yep.
And the actual player didn't have any experience with something like that. And throughout the course of the campaign, really came to, because there were people at the table who had actual experience with that. And through the course of the campaign, came to understand more of what that was like. And he was like, oh, wow, that's, and he came to have a lot more sympathy for what that was like, but also a small modicum of the shared experience. And he was like, wow, this makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Because,
but it was a powerful experience nonetheless, I think, for everyone.
Yes. And it's very interesting because I played in the campaign with this individual, and he straight up told me, he's like, well, I don't really know how to handle a confrontation for something like that. And I was like, well, I can tell you how to not handle it. And I had the advantage of playing a character who was incredibly wise and incredibly intelligent, and could guide him in some of those things in game as much as I could guide his character out of game. So we even were able to keep it in character, a lot of it, and some of it not. And it just created it was a very interesting experience, I think, for all involved. More uncomfortable for some than others, but
an example of how D&D can be used to help you understand the world around you better.
Yes.
Which is something I really think is true.
I actually I don't know if it was you who told me this story. I'm sure it was because we talk a lot. But there was a guy who was a teacher who decided to start playing D&D with his students as a way to help them deal with bullying and counter-bullying, and kind of delve into the psychology behind. I think he was a school counselor, maybe. How their characters acted and interacted, and how that played into where they clearly felt helpless, which was something that maybe they couldn't talk to him about, but that he could kind of get a feel for at the table and open up those avenues
Yes.
for them to vent them in other ways. And he had this kid that was a tiny nerdy kid who got picked on all the time, who decided he wanted to play an orc barbarian, and he was like, I see where this is going. You want to be strong, you want to not be able to be pushed around, and I get that. And there's a lot to that. And I think, especially when you first start playing, usually I think the first character you play, or at least the first couple, are the most similar to you.
Right. Usually.
You branch out from that as you become an experienced role player, but we not too long ago welcomed a new player into our our group, and the first character that she played, I designed, at least visually, on the artistic side of it for her, and I tried to make her look, like I felt not only like this person would envision her, but also like someone whose skin she could put herself in, because I think that first character is, it is the person you see yourself in the
It's your
most,
gateway.
and it's your gateway, and it's how you're going to learn the most, and
Well, it's funny that
you don't want to feel detached from that first character.
And that's the problem with role play, is it's hard to get into the attachment. I mean, every psychology
Or step away from
or step away. The psychology, if you I took psychology in college, and I mean, we are always talking about the power of role play, and for particularly victims, they're just allowed to tell their own story. They heal better and faster, and all of that. But like everyone, and whenever we were supposed to role play with each other, and then everyone goes, "Ugh, I hate this," because everyone feels awkward.
Mm-hmm.
The first time you role play is always very awkward.
Yep.
And especially if like a therapist is telling you to role play, I can imagine that can be very awkward because you may not be ready for it, or may not want to, or for any number of reasons. But it's so good for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so in society has especially made it kind of taboo. Like, this is a dumb thing.
Mm-hmm.
Dumb nerds love it, and then people who are super mentally ill have to do it.
Right. And the funny thing is that actually, I work in retail, and I have worked in retail for way too many years. But role play is also an incredibly powerful training technique. And it's one of those things that the minute somebody at the corporate meeting busts out, "We're going to role play now," everyone hates it, and nobody takes it seriously. But
there's a reason they want you to do it.
There's a reason they want you to do it, and I grew up role playing. It was just one of those things that my siblings and I all kind of took to, and it was chaotic but interesting. And I would sometimes lead these team exercises, and force my team to do this, and they were all like, "I just don't understand how you can like get into this," and I'm like, "Just stop for 10 seconds, because I know that you have shopped somewhere, right? Let's pretend you're not putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Put yourself in your own shoes, okay? Walk into this store, come up to me, and let's have a freaking salesperson customer conversation." And I'm going to try to frustrate you, and I promise you it's going to be really easy for me to frustrate you. And because I know what is frustrating to customers, and you should too because you've been one. And a lot of times it is very eye-opening for them to be like, okay, well, this is my boss, and I know she's pretending, so whatever. And they come up to me and they're like, well, how are you, ma'am? And I'm like, what can I do for you? And they instantly get this look on their face like, oh, I hate that. And it's like,
Because it's happened to everyone.
because it's happened to everyone. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I tell you to freaking smile at people and be nice to them. And you don't have to be falsely nice or overly energetic. But the minute you walk up to someone
But don't be apathetic and rude.
and they're apathetic, it dehumanizes them completely for you. They just immediately become an employee or a salesperson, not a person. And they're like, oh.
Yeah,
And I'm like,
part
yeah.
of the store.
Exactly. And I'm like, and and if you're going to be part of the store, you better at least be a good part.
Not the employee I have to deal with to
Yes.
get what I need.
Yes. And it's incredibly eye-opening for a lot of people because they are so used to going in and like, especially people who have never worked in retail, who that's their first job in retail, and they're so used to going in and dealing with retail employees and just being like, yeah, I get it, it's your job. And I'm like, but you really don't. You really don't until you've been on both sides and you realize what the difference is. And, I mean, there's a reason that my store was a top performing store. Like, not to brag, but human empathy is a big part of sales. It really is. It's a big part of everything.
I get it. You make $7.50 an hour. It's hard to put that energy in.
Yep.
Which is part of why you need to be a well-trained but also reasonably compensated employee.
Yes.
But a lot of corporate shenanigans are like, no, all we need to do is role play and train them better. It's like, well, not really.
Yeah, because if they don't understand the purpose behind the role play, they're never going to take to it, and they're not going to do it, and it's not going to sink in, and it's just going to be another stupid exercise that corporate made them do.
Right. Especially, too, though, if it's not worth the effort. You can understand what you need to do, but then not feel like you're being compensated enough for it.
Yeah.
That was my state job. People all knew what they needed to do. No one felt like they were compensated enough to do it, though.
And a lot of them weren't. I mean, I knew what I needed to do as a GameStop store manager, but when I sat down and I looked at my 90-plus hour work weeks,
totally wasn't worth it.
And I looked at my paycheck, and I looked at my assistant manager who never worked above 40 hours and made more than I did, I was like, oh, this isn't worth it. But I really loved my customers, and I really loved said assistant manager and just all of my employees, and I loved my job, and I wanted to stay in it, and ended up not being able to due to really complicated circumstances. But there is something to be said for having passion for your work, but also having compassion for the people that you're dealing with. And there are some people who you can't reason with, and that's fine. And, but I opened a lot of employees' eyes and prepared them for things when I flipped that table and said, okay, now you be the employee. And I walked up and just started screaming at them. And they were like, I don't know how to handle this. And I was like, that's why we're doing this.
Right.
Because if you can't handle me, who is pretending to be angry at you, it's just not gonna ever work when somebody is legitimately mad at you.
Indeed.
And, yeah, so it's a very interesting line of thought. And
speaking of interesting lines of thought, we had someone drop a comment and leave, but not sure I understand the point of what they are going for, so well, maybe just keep moving on from that one.
Okay. Fair enough. If they were still here, I guess we would ask them to clarify, but yeah. So this is the process that goes into making the comic that you guys enjoy, and I'm sorry if it's
Yeah.
boring.
How's your arm? It's been an hour.
My arm is okay right now. It is still super numb from pain meds,
Okay.
so
Sure. Okay, we'll probably go till 4 then.
yeah, I think 4's
I
a
just wanted to make sure your arm wasn't hurting.
yeah. I went to see another doctor today, and this gentleman is pretty familiar with me and treating some of my injuries, and he was like, "So my first question for you is, are you overworking it?" And I was like, "No, I mean, not." And he was just like, "Yeah, okay, well that's the first problem because you can't answer the question." um, but he had some good recommendations, and turns out a bunch of my ligaments are all out of place, and it's no bueno. And so I really, really appreciate everybody who has been bearing with us and our change in schedule, because I really love the story and creating and being able to interact with you guys, but it is not always easy sometimes. I think just the pure sketch of that hand was so bad that I can't even. I'm just going to resketch that hand later. Anyway, let's work on these powerful thighs.
That was like we were talking about. You have to roll with what happens. I think last art stream, we were talking about you have to roll with what happens as the dungeon master, and we talked about it a little bit this time too. But that's life. I mean, you start a webcomic and you're all excited, and then your artist gets an injury. It's just life you have to live with.
Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting because my doctor asked me if he was like, "So are you done with the drawing, or like what's up with that?" And I was like, "Oh no, I launched a webcomic and it's not going anywhere because like this is what I want to do with my life. And so you and I in this office, we're going to have to figure out a way to make that happen." And he was like, "Okay, great." Because that's the thing, is that no was not an option. And so we're just working from there. He has recommended, depending on how the next few weeks go, potentially physical therapy, which, I don't know all what that will entail, but we'll see. I've never had to do physical therapy before.
Mom hates it.
My mom hates it. My mom hates it a lot, but it is preventing her from having to have 3 major surgeries on her leg, so
Worth it.
Totally. My aunt also hated it, but hey, it's the reason she can walk. So.
Yeah.
And
Doctor Strange is all about that.
Yes, yes, it is. It's all about that and existential crises. Well, no, existential concepts.
Yes.
Existential concepts.
I like that movie a lot.
I acknowledge that that's a wonderful movie.
You don't have to like it.
And I enjoyed watching it, and I'll probably never watch it again. Because existential concepts aren't really my jam.
They don't have to be.
They are, in fact...
Drawing our cast members.
That has to be my jam. Yeah. Yep. Okay, I can deal with that.
They're all reasonably attractive people. So.
Wow, that it's always when you take off that base layer that you realize that you really fucked up. Okay, so let's.
I'm just glad you can see through that base layer to do other stuff, because it really distracts me.
I don't know what to say about that. That's just years of practice and desensitization.
Indeed.
Which, speaking of desensitization, I got some very interesting advice. Little known fact, I hate the sound of my voice on recordings. But I have rewatched our previous art stream like 8 times because I got some advice from a professional streamer who basically said, yeah, everybody's voice on the recording makes their ears bleed, watch it over and over and over until you desensitize yourself to that, because that is how you learn to critique your content. And so, I have been looking at that quite a bit. And another thing that I discovered when rewatching it 1,000 times was rewatching myself draw things. I watched myself make mistakes that I was like, oh, that was a mistake, and I went through and then fixed before we published. I fixed the bulk of them, and the rest of them aren't really noticeable. Before we published the page, so that was just an interesting, helpful little tidbit. And
yeah, I was gonna say, I think I haven't met many people that go, oh wow, I love the way I sound on a recording.
Yeah. Okay, her face is just way too large. Yeah. All right. Okay. I don't know what happened here, but she looks like Gaston. And maybe nobody twerks like Gaston, but that's not what this is about.
I think she builds fires better than Gaston.
Gaston builds trash fires really well.
Yeah, that's true. So does LeFou in the newest one.
Oh, I wanted to love LeFou in the newest one, but I didn't. That's all I'm going to say about
what's
that.
This tool you're using? Because it looks really interesting.
This is the lasso tool, and it lets you select a piece of something and just move it. But it's probably going to be blurry when it's done. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to have to redraw, but that's okay. Because then I can tilt her face back, and then I can fix her jawline so it's not quite so square. And
as we were speaking about delicate elven features earlier.
Yes. And her mouth is just gonna be a problem, but yeah, that's much better already. But her head is just too big. Okay, so time to just
have a bit of a narrative vibe going there.
Time to just stop it. All right.
Stop it, art program. Stop it.
I know I told you to do that, but I didn't mean it. And I think we can grab up through the ear and this whole space. And then we're just gonna whoop. Oh, that's too small, I bet. Okay. For anyone who was guessing up until this point, yeah, art is a lot of bullshitting until you get it right. And adjustments and trying again and trial and error and failure and failure and failure and failure and failure and then success. And that is just the name of the game.
Which is why you shouldn't ask artists to give you free art.
Yeah.
Looking at you, internship industry.
Freaking the intern. Not gonna talk about it. I'm mad. I'm mad, and I'm not gonna get on that subject. But unpaid internship is slavery. Fight me.
At best, it's indentured servitude, and I don't think anyone ever said that was great either.
And also, you know what? If you ask an artist for free art, ask away. But the truth of the matter is,
don't get upset when you get told no.
You're probably going to get told no. And if you don't get told no, you're going to get what you paid for.
That's very true.
That is just like, do I love this comic? Absolutely. Do I get paid to make this comic? Sadly, not very much. Ultimately, everybody wants to do something they love, but they also work to get paid. Okay? And I have lost some commissioners because they didn't want to pay my prices. But at the end of the day, I looked at the quality of work that I handed them and looked at the hours that I put into it and the money that I made in it, and I just couldn't go lower, I'm like, look, I wish I could charge you less than $120 for this, but it's already 3 times what you originally suggested it was going to be, and it's taken up months of my life. And if you find someone else okay, great, sorry, bye, but I gotta eat too, you know? And I know that there are people who are under the impression that artists don't really work, and that, you know, it's just a drawing, and that anything upwards of $100 is completely unreasonable, but I would...
Just a drawing, but I mean, just a drawing sold for $17 million at an art auction yesterday.
Exactly. That's my exact point is, you know, you can go to an art gallery and spend anywhere from $100 to $4 million on a piece that probably some other person also has hanging in their living room. You know, not in the $4 million range, but it's not custom made for you.
Mm-hmm.
And
the classics, the historical classics, go for just so much money.
mm-hmm. I mean, I can't buy a reprint of a Van Gogh on a decent material for less than $200, $300.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how much I would love to have a Van Gogh hanging
That's
in?
a reprint of something that's been around for a long
Yeah, that's a reprint of something that everybody has done their own iteration of, and that is on everybody's cell phone cases. But if I want it,
if you want a Giclée print, which is the lowest quality of the nice kind, you're looking at minimum 150 for anything, and for something that has value like that, more.
And the truth of the matter is that, you know, Van Gogh made that because he was having a schizophrenic fit, not because I asked him to make it.
Right.
You know?
And you didn't get to specify exactly how you wanted it.
Yep. And I love it, and I love all of his work. I'm a huge Van Gogh fan. And you know,
he would have made more if people had paid for his art.
Yeah, he would have.
But he ate, paint, and died.
And he, frankly, would have probably been around a lot longer if people had paid for his art. And man, if there is one human being in the world, in the world's history, that I wish I could just sit down and freaking talk to and give a hug, it was him.
Yeah.
It was him for sure. And you know, especially when you look at some of his works that aren't as dark, you just can see how much he was struggling, because you can see how much there was a beautiful, hopeful person inside of all of that. And that just makes me so sad, because wow, he was a treasure. And speaking of treasures that make me really sad, my Facebook feed this morning when I woke up, was just full of Robin Williams stuff. And I'm just like, every time I see Robin Williams' face, I miss him, and I never even met him. Because that man was a treasure. And another artist who, although he's a very different kind of artist, was struggling, and it's so horrible to lose people to a struggle that maybe it could have been prevented, maybe it couldn't, we'll never know. Man, if you're struggling, please reach out to someone. You know, message us on an art stream. I don't know. Boy.
Yeah,
that's
real sad.
I know that got real dark from talking about paying artists for their art, but just as someone who experiences struggles sometimes, and, you know, can't pay for medical care on my art, by the by, thanks America. It just is, it's a touchy subject, I guess.
Well, and it's one that people like to shy away from.
Until it suits them.
Right.
And that makes me even more mad. And that can start me on a tangent that I do not need to go on.
The point is that, I mean, even if we're strangers, we are sympathetic strangers.
Right.
And we don't want anyone that enjoys our art to feel like there's no one there, you know?
Yeah.
Because I mean, we are.
It's and really, it just is like, man, I know what it feels like to feel alone. And when people tell you, "Oh, reach out if you feel alone," that doesn't mean shit to you, because it is hard. and it is such a vulnerable position to be in. And there's always the chance that you're going to reach out to the wrong person, and they're going to reject you, and that is such a frightful thing, and it's not something that I think enough people take care of and pay attention to. And so I guess maybe it's preachy, but that's something that I I think we discussed that we try not to get very political, but if we preach being a good person and helping others,
ends up being political.
and it ends up being political, then that's a sad thing, but also that's a comfortable political stance that I can take.
I mean, because we're not preaching politics, we're preaching be a good person, and we want to be good people, and we want to make, primarily we're here to make good art, but what does that matter if you can't be a good person?
What does it matter if you can't be a good person, or if the people who would otherwise enjoy it can't enjoy it because they feel like nobody cares about them, and it's not cool, and it's not fair, and
Alex approves of this message.
And Alex approves this message, and that's saying something because Alex doesn't approve much of anything. But I do care about every person pretty much in the world, just on principle. If I see someone who I feel like needs a hug, I know I might get sued, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to give them one. And
Van Gogh gets enough money to eat because he sues you for hugging him.
Right? And I'm just like, well, if you needed it that much, I got news for you. Sue away. You're getting credit card debt. That's my net value. Credit card debt and student loans. Woohoo!
I love those things. I have a lot of them.
I dodged one of those bullets, but not the other one. And
I got a full ride scholarship, and I still didn't dodge the no student loans.
And yet, I actually saw this really delightful, horrible comic that.
How dare I want to go to school in summer? Anyway, go ahead.
That actually a friend of ours shared with me, and it's this guy, and he's dead, and the Grim Reaper shows up and is like, hey, listen, the reason your soul isn't moving on is because you have unfinished business on Earth. And the guy's like, no, I settled all my affairs. I knew I was dying. I was prepared. And he's like, it says here you have $20,000 in student loans. And the guy's like, well, then what the fuck was the point of dying? and it's so terrible, but it was really great because it was pretty true, and it was kind of funny. And
you're not allowed to die until you pay these off.
Right. And I just, the fact that declaring bankruptcy does not, that federal student loans get around that. Well, medical bills don't, but student loans do.
When I first was starting to go to college, I read an article about this woman who finished college and moved to Mexico and stopped paying her loans because she was like, I just can't live in America anymore. These loans are crushing me. I'm going to go somewhere where I'm valued. Mm-hmm. And she just went to Mexico, expatriated over student loans.
Yep. And it's sad, but we have.
And at the time, I was like, what? And now I totally understand.
And now that you're a young professional in a field that desperately needs you and is understaffed, and yet
will pay me less than Chick-fil-A.
Yep.
That's the joke of the day.
I just saw something, in fact, this morning about this guy talking about student loans and law school and medical school, and he's like, I know a lot about law and law school. I am a lawyer, and I'm here to tell you, go become a bus driver or a plumber, because plumbers get rich.
Yeah.
And that made me sad. That made me sad. It made me not wonder why I've almost died of medical incompetence on multiple occasions.
They did it to get rich and then found out that they pay so much in malpractice that they don't.
Yep.
And that they have to buy the insurance, so there's no reason not to be lazy in malpractice.
Yep. And also that, Yeah.
Any hoozles.
Profoundly broken systems.
Leather armor is cool.
Yep. And I'm gonna have to tone this pauldron down. I know that, but I don't want to because WoW tells me not to, and Warhammer tells me not to.
Well, large pauldrons are an attractive look that just an impractical reality.
Yes. In fact.
But covering the joints is important.
Yes. Covering the joints is important, and you know what? In metal armor, I'll let myself get away with large pauldrons, but not in leather armor. Because in leather armor, large pauldrons are just so impractical in terms of crafting them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, one of the reasons why metal pauldrons are so large is because it's hard to make them small and compact. It's literally difficult to treat leather to become a large pauldron. Mm-hmm. But also, I recognize that I drew shoulders a little too small, so I'm compensating a little, and it'll look right when I'm done, I'm sure.
Sure it will too.
Or it won't, but whatever.
If anyone ever brings up that Shale's armor is less protective than it could be, that's how she wanted it.
This is a legitimately true story. Okay, so I came into this going, I'm not drawing bikini armor, and unfortunately, our player had leather armor that was
She bought legit leather armor.
She bought legit leather armor, and one of the first things she did was say, "All right, I cut out the middle piece of all my leather armor
because I'm hot."
And Ranger as a DM was like, "Okay, you lose 2 of your AC bonus," and she's like, "I don't care." So,
and I was like, "Fair enough."
Fair enough. Like, okay, this is you can't argue with that. Like, she made the conscious choice to be less protected because she wanted to show off her abs and her ab
What's
paint.
What's the point of my 18 strength if I don't have rock hard, really attractive abs?
And I was like,
that I can show off.
Well, I am not here to tell you that you have no right to show off your attractive female self. So okay,
and she's a barbarian.
And barbarians tend to wear much less armor, and
she's a hit point tank, and the character is very confident. I mean,
yep. As we discussed,
any page you see her in, she's excited and confident.
And I think, as we mentioned in the previous stream, has no sense of self-preservation whatsoever. None. And so, you know what? I was like, okay. Now, it's not bikini armor. I think it's a little more sensible than it could have been.
Well, I mean, just the point of the fact is she would be uncomfortable.
Yes.
If it were.
Yes.
So, I mean, the way that it binds her in and keeps her from going all over the place would still make sense for someone that even wants to show off her attractiveness or her strength or whatever, because she just needs that.
And the truth of the matter is, this character, she is, the daughter of the chieftain of her tribe, or like the best friend of the son of the chieftain, something like that. She's in a fairly decent position of power. She's well respected. She is the most attractive person in her clan. She is actually one of the most intelligent people in her clan of barbarians.
And one of the strongest.
And one of the strongest.
Most capable of hunting.
And most capable. And so it kind of comes down to who was going to stop her? No one. No one was going to stop her, because if she...
And Oriella, a Fae, is like, I don't understand why anyone wears armor, because she comes from a privilege of her skin resists being attacked and naturally.
Yep. And so it's, it's just one of those things that, like, I do take pride in all of our character designs, and it's one of the reasons why I did redesign a couple of characters from, their original. In fact, I redesigned everyone slightly, but some people got a more major redesign than others. And, it's because there are some people who that makes sense for, and some people it doesn't. Mimi is a respected warrior of the high heavens with military training, girls not running around in bikini armor.
And a heritage.
And a heritage to think of people who are are staunch defenders of goodness and this, that, and the other, and they don't. That silly shit doesn't. That silly mortal shit doesn't fly, among them, and that makes sense. And so she is dressed appropriately to have been someone in that position. But you got a barbarian running around with a half-naked fae. That's not that surprising.
No.
At the end of the day, and does that mean Alex approves of it? No.
No, he thinks you could still be like he would even say to Oriella, you could still have armor to protect yourself further. And she's like, nah, done.
And Oriole's like, hey, you're a stupid mortal man, and I seduce people like you for breakfast. Mm-hmm. And she's wrong, but she doesn't realize that. Or care. She does not care. Oriella is in the interesting position that one of the reasons that, and I can't really say much because spoilers, but she's a character that comes into a lot of interesting conflicts, and one of the reasons why she does is she simply does not care if she's conflicting with other people, which is something that most people and human beings, they don't think like that, and it's
Sir Peter says, tactically speaking, bikini armor sucks.
Yes.
He's very right.
Yes. This is a true story. But that does not mean that it's not hot.
And well, I mean, it accomplishes that.
Yes.
And, we're not trying to sell anyone that her armor is going to make her more protected.
No, I'm not.
And we're not trying to sell that her armor is some magical artifact that was designed that way.
Because it wasn't.
That's WoW's failing. It's like this incredibly protective magical plate armor of the bear's spirit, blah blah blah, is somehow going to be a bikini armor protective item for a woman, but a giant piece of metal that for a man, that.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the point is that it's an avatar that is super attractive.
Yes.
That's the point.
But that is the thing, is that this is neither an MMO nor an anime. And so we skip a few of those tropes, and I am proud to skip those tropes.
I said thankfully that it's not an MMO, but then I thought, well, I'd actually be pretty happy if there were
a Threads of Fate
Threads
MMO.
of Fate MMO.
I would too. Do you know how much time of my life I would spend running around as this adorable blob of being scared and playing music?
Well, they would make a great character.
Yes, and
the only well, not I guess not the only one, but the Lord of the Rings MMO that came out a long time ago, you could play a bard. I guess in DDO, Dungeons and Dragons Online, you can too, but I think you have to combine it with other things to make it great.
Great, and I am very sad that WoW does not have a bard class, because I think I would probably still play WoW if it did. I tried my hand at a handful of classes in WoW and a handful of races, and I didn't dislike any of them, but I also didn't love any of them enough to deal with playing online with other people, because I'm not super good at games like that, and the expectation is that you be super good at games like that if you play them, and it's just not there for me.
That's true. I mean, I loved my Dwarf Hunter and my Night Elf Priest a lot, but what I didn't like was a new expansion came out and you had to spend the next 400 hours getting back to where you were at.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I get it, and that's the grind and that's the gameplay and all of that, but I lost the ability to spend that much time.
Exactly. And, that's the thing is, could I have eventually become really good at WoW if I had spent a lot of time on it? Yes, I think so. But ultimately, that interim of I'm not super good at this and I'm now at a point in the game where I can't run around alone and level up anymore and I'm expected to participate in raids and this, that, and the other, that killed me. That killed me.
Yeah,
and it just...
You can't reach a plateau that you're comfortable with and stay there because
Yes.
everyone else moves on.
Yes. And I do like games, but I recognize that I'm not super good at them. The games that I'm good at are games that I can practice a lot. Like, Don't Starve, that I've put 426 hours into, and then I turn on a stream and I look at it and go, oh, wait, no, I suck at Don't Starve too. So
Yeah,
because...
those streams were
Yeah, they sure were. So in order to compensate for that, it has to be a game that I have just an immense amount of fun with to be okay with not being super good at it. And I can't have an immense amount of fun playing with other people. That's just the truth.
Well, and it's got to tell you that quickly too. Like when I first got the Banner Saga, I've been on a Banner Saga kick lately. When I first got it, I lost the first fight, and I was like, well, okay, I'm not playing this. And then 3 years later, I pick it up and I go, this is an incredible game.
Yep.
And I really like it, but I'm just like, I don't have time to beat my head against things.
Yep. And the thing is that
hopefully one day we do.
I wish that I were better with people, and that people didn't freak me out so badly that, oh, you know why I drew this large? Because it's supposed to be puffy. That's where his fur goes. That's not where his pauldron goes.
The fur, not the pauldron.
Yep. So I just need to change its shape a little. But yeah, I just I get kicked out of a raid group, and it doesn't necessarily upset me, but it makes me not want to join another one because I'm like, no, I'm just gonna disappoint people. And it scares me. I don't like dealing with people who are mad at me. Because
Sir Peter says Civ, and I assume he means is asking
Civilization.
If you like Civilization games.
Yes.
We put an unhealthy amount of time into Civilization. Yeah.
Yes.
Civ 5 specifically.
Yes. I love Civ 5, and
I think that game has the largest number of hours on my Steam account.
Yeah. I love Civilization builders. I have since I was very young, because they're entirely tactical, and I mostly can play them alone or with people who are kind of on level. And because it's competitive, I'm okay with that because it's like, if I lose, I can still have fun. And
you still built a civilization.
I still built a civilization, and maybe it got crushed by China because it turns out they had planes and I had long swords. You know what? Fine. But
well, didn't we have a game where Wu
yeah.
We were like, oh yeah, we're gonna go mess up China because we defeated another civilization, and then she had infantry, and we were like, oh, we have cavalry.
Yeah, and
we got knights, and she's like, well, beat my musketmen.
We went undiscovered with China for a long time, and we were actually playing on a team, and we attacked one of her allies, I think.
Yeah.
And we're like, no big deal. As far as we knew, we were at the head of our game. Well, that created a generation-spanning blood war between us and China, at which point she was always scientifically ahead of us, and
we were culturally more powerful.
But hey, your culture doesn't mean a whole lot when China's dropping bombs on all of your cities and all of your people who have that great culture lose it to atomic bombs.
So I did beat Civ 5 on the hardest difficulty with a cultural victory, but it was because I managed to put so much cultural pressure on them. On the Ottoman Empire were the ones. They were in a constant golden age. They were in a golden age the entire game.
Wow.
And he gets military bonuses when he's in a golden age.
Mm-hmm.
And I confuse Persia and the Ottoman Empire sometimes. I might have that backwards, but They were pressuring me like crazy, and I was completely my little and it was a one city challenge,
Right.
so it was my one city was just constantly surrounded, but I managed to exert enough cultural pressure and get my Utopia project finished just before I was destroyed, because everyone else would be like, "Don't attack them. We love their culture."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Yeah, guys, come on."
Come on, love our culture. Wear our blue jeans.
But it was by the skin of my teeth. I
Yep.
barely beat that one.
And you know, I'm not sure I've ever won a game of Civilization played with other human beings, except winning via my teammate.
Well, for me, the AI is harder than real humans, at a certain point, because the way they make the AI more difficult is they give them huge bonuses that people don't get.
Mm-hmm. And but you know, I've been playing one Civilization builder or another an unhealthy amount since I was a very small child, and I think. Oh, and also Sir Peter says that that's hella impressive, and he's right.
Well, I'm probably not the best Civilization player, but I have an achievement that only 0.56% of Civ players have, so I feel pretty good about
I
that.
don't think I have any achievements.
Well,
I
that
have
might be because of other reasons.
I I have no idea what you're talking about. I I have the achievement
So
of
Peter says the AI cheats, and he's 100% correct.
it is true.
They're dirty, rotten scoundrels.
Mm-hmm. And I think basically the way that anyone makes AI better is to just make them cheat. And this is true in everything from Civ to freaking Mario. My mom, I love her so much, but like she has a cocaine level addiction to a lot of Mario games, particularly Fortune Street, which is one of the least well known Nintendo IPs in the world.
I'd never heard of it until I played 200 hours of it with her.
Yes. Um, I brought that game home on a whim because it looked like Monopoly met Mario Party, and I knew my mom liked Mario Party, and my mom's an accountant, and she loves money, so it seemed like a really good investment, and it turns out it was. She now plays games where she basically ignores all of the mechanics to make herself better and still manages to bankrupt every other player.
It gives her such
And it gives her such
gleeful
joy.
energy.
It is amazing just to watch. It's not amazing to play unless you're just very comfortable with losing. In fact, this one time I was playing with her, and it was like the week of my birthday, and I noticed that I was winning. And I was like, Mom, what are you doing right now? And she's like, oh, oops, I accidentally bought this property I couldn't afford. And I was like, you filthy cheater. You're cheating to let me win. But the way that the AI progresses and gets better is that they just, when you set them on a harder difficulty, they never roll badly.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, my mom, she she has a very deep understanding of finances and stock markets and all this stuff
And that game.
and that game. Oh my God, does she understand that game? And so I'm like running around and I'm like, I'm going to buy some stocks here. And she's like, why would you do that? I'm like, why wouldn't I do that? And she's like, because as you can see, this district is about to increase in value and this, that, and the other. And I'm just like, oh, okay. So yeah, my mom also handles my pathetic investment portfolio. um, but yeah, it's an interesting and very fun game, and I'm sad they never made a sequel because I don't know that anyone else in the world really loved that game, but she sure did, and
It's pretty fun.
she still plays it to this day, and I wish that they would make another one so that she could have a whole new way to miserably crush everyone beneath her feet.
You just have to make it big and make a Threads Fortune Street.
Yes.
Vissian Street.
Yeah. So what you don't buy stock, you just murder zombies.
Yeah.
And
But we can call it stock.
but you can still collect coins and she'll be happy.
You buy stock in Alex, and then how
you
many
win.
zombies he kills is how much money you get off the investment.
Cheshire says, I would like to invest my only $2 in Alex.
Sir Peter says stock market's the game. It's so much fun.
I am so glad there's another human being who has played Fortune Street. Like, it really, it is kind of fun, but every other person I've ever mentioned it to is like, what? And I'm just
I've
like,
never heard of it
you,
before
yep,
meeting your mother.
yes.
It's really fun to watch her play it. She just gets so mad and happy and
Yes,
sad all at the same
it's
time.
really hilarious because my mom raised me not to not to curse, right? She's offended by it, um, and my dad was in the army, so he did not raise me that way, and I stuck to this pretty hard until I was about 15 ish, and we brought home Mario Party for the first time, and the slew of words that came out of my mother's mouth. um,
That string of curse words is still overlay Greenwood to this day.
yes, and now you'll walk into the like. So my mother lives right down the road from me, right? And sometimes I will hear screaming in the night. Like that sounds like there might be a domestic violence dispute nearby, and I'll text her and I'll be like, "So, um, who's beating you at Mario Party right now?" And she's like, "How'd you know?" And I'm like, "Mom, I can
I can
literally
hear
hear
you."
you. I can hear you from a quarter mile down the road." And she's like, "Oh." And it's just it's quite delightful.
Another great game, Sir Peter says, to kill friendships like Mario Party is Dokapon Kingdom.
I have heard of Dokapon Kingdom and I have watched the Game Grumps play it. And I actually thought about buying it for her, but then I realized that I wanted my mother to still love me. And so I didn't.
I have not even heard of Dokapon Kingdom.
It's kind of like Mario Party, except you like can earn I don't want to call them properties, but they're like spaces in a kingdom from what I understand, and you can do like quests and defeat monsters and get more treasure. And yeah, I think she would like it, and I think that uh, she would be really good at it, and
Get real mad at people.
get real mad at people, or other people would get real mad at her. And so you know what? I got her Mario Party on Switch instead, and guess what? It was the same story.
Sir Peter says, "Oh my God, that's fair."
Yeah.
My only real Mario Party story is that in my group of friends, I was the one who didn't have a Nintendo, and so when I would go to their houses and we play these games, particularly like Super Smash Brothers, I just lost. I never won.
Right.
Um, and it's like having me on your team was considered a handicap, and
That was me
I
with Halo.
tended to just play the fun characters. Like I like to play Mewtwo and throw people and shoot them with my laser beams,
Right.
but that's not good. He's not
No.
good. But anyway, the point of this is we were playing Mario Party for somebody's birthday, and there's one particular mini game in one of these Mario parties. It was an earlier one.
Mm-hmm.
That I have really good control over quick repetitive movements, and I was undefeated in this mini game and won that round of Mario Party because that mini game disproportionately came up, and it made the birthday boy's birthday bad because he was so mad because he would have otherwise won, but I won this mini game, and he's like, "But you suck at console games," and I'm like, "Not this one."
Yep.
It was really funny.
There's a
And
lot of button
it
smashing
ruined our
games.
friendship for a day too.
Yep. There is a lot of button smashing mini games in Mario Party, and I'm not anymore because my hands have gotten slow and old and
And in
sore and in pain. But I used to be the queen of button smashing, and my sister is also extremely good at repetitive button smashing. And we could swing a whole game of Mario Party or One Piece Pirates Carnival or Shrek Super Party, you name it, the Mario Party ripoffs, because at least one of them always had a team mini game that was button smashing, and we somehow miraculously would end up on a team together, And my other siblings were known to just put their controllers down
Just be done.
and just be done because
'Cause
there was no point. And
That's funny.
and it was funny right up until the point that a particular sibling who doesn't take losing well would either, or one of two particular siblings who didn't take losing well would either do me physical harm post match or would throw our controllers and things. Because I had a zillion siblings, so everything we owned, we shared.
Right.
So when my brother got mad and threw the PS2 controller, my mom was like, well, you guys need to take care of your stuff, and wouldn't replace it. And so it was the cause of much strife. And
as we see, Mario Party ends families and friendships.
yes, my ex and I almost divorced over Fortune Street because he is a very competitive individual, an unhealthily competitive individual, and I owned a circus. And he bought that circus from me. And I was like, you know what, no problem, okay. And I bought it back when I wandered by. And he was like, you can't do that. That was mine. You stole that from me.
Like, it's in the game.
And I was like, bro, you just stole it from me. I just took it back. So he became very spiteful and decided that it didn't matter if he bankrupted himself, he was going to keep taking it back. And I was doing a little bit better than him, and I continued to take it back from him. And at one point, he almost threw my mom's Wii remote and stormed out of the house. And I had to go after him and be like, bruh, really? Are we doing this right now? Like, this is the level of temper tantrum we're going to throw? And he was like, I just can't believe you did that to me. And I was like, I believe that your perspective on this is a little skewed, and you should go home and cool down.
Yes.
And he left. Now, luckily, like I said, we lived down the street, right? So, like, it wasn't like I lost my ride, but I passionately believe if we'd had to drive an hour, he'd have left me anyway. And my mom was like, is he okay? And I was like, no, he's not okay, not in the head. But it was really funny because my mom was throwing the match to be nice to us because like we were a new couple and we were playing and whatever. It was somebody's birthday or some shit, and she was like, well, now that he's gone, and just went from losing to just instantly crushed all of us. And I was like, oh, okay. It was pretty amazing.
But even if she let you beat her, she still wins sometimes when she tries to let you win.
Yes. Like,
That's how good she is.
my mom has tried to throw a game to me and then occasionally been like, okay, Rachel, I'm going to need you to stop
making bad decisions.
Stop being so bad at this so that you can win. And I'm like, thanks, Mom. I'm glad you love Cheshire's Face, Sir Peter. I also love Cheshire's Face a lot.
It's a good face.
They are one of my you know what, I'm gonna say it. Cheshire's my favorite character. and I love, and Cheshire and Aintai are two of my favorite characters to draw because their faces are just delightfully expressive and
so it's our last 10 minutes.
yes.
I just wanted to field any questions anyone has. I think we have a few less people this time. But if anyone has a question specifically about anything they'd like to ask, now would be the time. We'll take a couple of questions if anyone has any.
Yep.
But yes, Cheshire's Face is super adorable. Oh gosh. She's the it's probably pretty fair. They're pretty great
Yes.
to have as a bard, sure, but they I don't know, I say it without any sort of.
Yeah, spoilers are really hard, especially with Cheshire, but
they're one of those bards that you're just like, oh man, we're glad that they're here.
Yep. And it's funny because unfortunately for them, that sentiment does not come about in the party for a while.
Yeah.
um,
In the
and
whole party, we should say.
well, yeah. A lot of the party warms up to Cheshire very fast to a point where it almost becomes like Team Cheshire versus the rest of the party, because Cheshire is a little bit on the helpless spectrum, and particularly because, as we mentioned in the last stream, a lot of these characters started with a gigantic level adjustment. Gigantic level adjustments are not good when you are a bard with 8 hit points and you're facing like level 5 stuff because you count as level 5, and you're a bard played by a player who is not very good at D&D yet, and also a bard who is scared of everything, so you don't use any of your special abilities that justified your level adjustment.
Let's be fair to them, though. Most bards are on the have to be specially protected spectrum.
Yes. I think really one of the only combat-oriented bards we had was in a campaign that I ran, and he still was special and had to be protected.
Blaze protected him.
He sure did. Like,
Blaze protected all of them.
yes, particularly Fafnir. Okay, and so we're talking about a party that had a bronze dragon in the party that needed to be protected. A brass dragon. Yeah, sorry, brass dragon that needed to be protected, and it's just really interesting because the bard needed to be protected socially.
Yeah.
Because he was also one of those, because you see all the bard memes that are like, I seduce the dragon, or I find the first thing that I can and stick my dick in it. He was one of those. He was one of those, and he didn't make a lot of wise decisions.
No.
And the first person that he slept with was a succubus, who, by the way, he impregnated and then let get kidnapped and then kind of forgot about for quite a while. And he because of his social tendencies, he spent a lot of goodwill that the party earned. And so then he was like, I'm going to be super combat oriented to make up for it. And the bard is not supposed to be a super combat oriented character as a general rule unless you kit them out to be that way. And he was not kitted out to be that way.
So Peter says always protect the bard.
That is right.
And you'll be glad you did.
Yeah, because the bard, when you start playing, you don't think that +1 to hit and damage is a lot. But let me tell you how many times we've been in a situation where you narrowly missed by like 1 or 2, and it's like, oh my god, I wish we had a bard.
And D&D is a particular game where missing by 1 or 2 is the same as missing by 10 or 40.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yep, you missed.
And I mean, I like to try and narrate a lot of different things. Like, if it is a 1 or 2 that it hits but doesn't penetrate the armor, or a narrow miss, or if you hit and only do 1 damage, that is like the arrow strikes across your arm and stuff like that. There is opportunity for flavor, but if you miss, it's just
you miss, man.
It doesn't matter.
And if you had that bard behind you singing and making you feel like you're better than you were, and you believed it, and you super believed it, maybe you would have hit.
And 1 hit can be the difference between a party wipe or not.
Oh my god, you are not kidding. Particularly in a fairly recent encounter that in a campaign we're currently playing, I discovered that I had been calculating my paladin's mounted charge damage wrong. And he was supposed to do way more damage than he was doing. And it turned out he was, once that was calculated properly, was one-shotting some pretty ugly enemy priests. And I was like, so if I miss, I'm going to die because he's going to turn around and drop some horrendous blood magic abomination on me. So I have to kill him right now. And I'd have been real sour if I'd have missed by 1. And, that it just does, it makes a huge difference, because sometimes it turns out that if you hit that person you do plus 96 damage to them, and it's like, oh. I didn't realize.
Yeah, Spirited Charge is really good. Pro
Mm-hmm.
tip to everyone. So is the Cavalier class.
Yep. I was just like, oh yeah, okay, I do double damage on a charge, but for some reason I was thinking double damage on a charge if I crit, and so I was never applying the double damage on a charge, and
Well,
also
I
I
wasn't
was
paying attention to it because she was doing the Lance's charge double damage, and then I
right.
was like, yo, no, that means you do 3 times damage
Yep.
because you do a double damage, and a double damage makes you do a 3 times damage in D&D.
And when your bard, moments before they became confused and ran away and killed a squirrel, casts a bull's strength on you, and that gets tripled. It's it's a whole mess of bloody avian priest smears on the end of your lance. It turns out.
It sure is, and they're brittle boned anyway, right?
Yep.
No one likes them. All right, it's 4:00. Thanks everyone for tuning into our stream. We love you guys.
Yes.
As always, check out our Patreon if you like what we're doing. It's at the Threads team, Threads of Fate comic, and we will have a page for you this Sunday.
Yes, and you'll get to see Cheshire's adorable face twice even in this page.
That's right, they're in this twice, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah, so thank you everybody so much for coming and talking to us and, listening to our opinions about things that you may not have signed up for, but now you know.
You know what you're supporting.
Yeah, you know what you're supporting, but the good news is it's mostly just be a good person and not a piece of garbage.
Like cool art.
And like D&D.
And like D&D.
Yep.
Well, that's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's mostly true, I think. All right, so I will see you guys all later. Beep.